All right, fifth graders, this is Mr. Combs, and today we are going to be doing Module 6, Lesson 6. So the first thing I'm going to go over is our learning target and success criteria. We can remember that our learning target is what we will be able to do, and then our success criteria is how we're going to be able to do it. So our learning target for today is going to be I can plot points using decimals and use these points to create line segments. Our success criteria is going to be determine point for x-axis, determine point for y-axis, write out coordinate point as parentheses x, comma, y in parentheses, and then connect points to create line segment. Before we begin, I'm going to go over some important vocabulary for today's lesson. The first vocabulary phrase that I'm going to go over is line segment. A line segment is a line that has a distinct starting point and end point. The next word is region. A region is a specific place on a coordinate plane. The third vocabulary word is perpendicular. This is when two lines intersect at a 90-degree angle. And then the last vocabulary word is parallel. This is two lines that are on a plane that never meet and stay the same distance apart. And so here I can see I have a picture here that kind of gives you an example of lines that would be considered parallel and not parallel, perpendicular and not perpendicular. So the first one on the top row, we can see the set of parallel lines are lines that are going to stay the same distance apart and never cross. So I always think of these like railroad tracks. When you look at the one that says not parallel, you can see if that line on the right hand side would keep going, it would eventually intersect with that one on the left hand side. On the bottom here, we can see an example of lines that are perpendicular and then ones that are not perpendicular. So for the perpendicular line, it looks like a T, okay? It's coming to that 90-degree angle, okay? If that line were to keep going, it would look kind of like a cross. For not perpendicular, you can see that that line is not at a 90-degree angle. And so those are our vocabulary words, and we are going to get rolling. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to the photo just so we can be sure we see. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of talk about how we can think about using decimal points and decimal numbers to also find points on our coordinate planes. So previously we've only used fractions, but now we're going to start thinking about using decimals. So here I have my handy dandy coordinate plane. And the first thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at my whole numbers. So I'm just going to put a box around these whole numbers down here so I can see them nice and well. Okay, and then what I'm going to think about is I'm going to think about how many lines on my x-axis I have in between 0 and my first whole number. So I see that I have 1, 2, 3 lines, okay, that's split into 4 sections. So now I need to start thinking about what decimal would go into one whole 4 times. So when I'm thinking about one whole divided by 4, I'm going to know that one whole divided by 4 is going to be equal to 25 hundredths. So I could label each one of these points as using intervals of 25 hundredths. So my first one is going to be 25 hundredths. My next one is going to be 50 hundredths, 75 hundredths. Okay, and then I'm just going to actually keep going and keep labeling. If I added 25 hundredths to one whole, okay, or 25 hundredths to 75 hundredths, I would have one whole. Then if I added 25 hundredths to one whole, I would have 1 and 25 hundredths. Then I would have 1 and 50 hundredths, 1 and 75 hundredths, 1 and 75 hundredths plus another 25 hundredths is going to give me 2 wholes. Okay, so then I'm just going to keep going. 2 and 25 hundredths, 2 and 75 hundredths, or 2 and 50 hundredths, excuse me. This is another reason why we always do math in pencil. Okay, so we can erase those pesky mistakes. now 2 and 75 hundredths. Then I'm going to go up to 3 wholes. I know I'm still just adding 25 hundredths to 3 and 25 hundredths. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look over here on my y-axis, and I'm going to do kind of the same thing. I'm going to box my whole numbers just so I can have those nice and pulled out. Okay, all right, and then I'm going to think about how many segments I have, how many lines on my coordinate plane I have between 0 and my holes. So I see that I have 1, 2, 3 lines splitting that up into 4 sections. So I know that 1 divided by 4 is going to give me 25 hundredths. So each one of these lines is going to be increasing by 25 hundredths. So 25 hundredths, 50 hundredths, 75 hundredths, 1 whole. Then I'm going to have 1 and 25 hundredths, 1 and 50 hundredths, 1 and 75 hundredths to 2 wholes. Okay, then I'm going to have 2 and 25 hundredths, 2 and 50 hundredths, 2 and 75 hundredths, and then all the way up to 3 wholes. So now what we're going to work on doing is we're going to create a couple of different lines using our coordinate points. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label my coordinate points. And so I've already done one for us. So I've done A, I've actually done 2. I've already done A and D. So the first thing I'm going to do for A is I'm going to go over on my x-axis. I see that on the x-axis, the point A is on 75 hundredths, and then I'm going to go up to my y, and I see that it's at 1 whole, okay? So my xy coordinate is going to be 75 hundredths and 1 whole. Now I'm going to do the same thing for B, so I'm going to go over on my x all the way till I can see B. I see that B is at the 1 and 75 hundredths point on my x-axis, and I'm going to go all the way up now, okay, and I'm going to go over to 2 wholes, okay, over to 2 wholes, and then I'm going to label this as my coordinate point, 1 and 75 hundredths, and then 2 wholes, okay, so I'm going to label that there. And then now I'm going to keep going for C. I'm going to go all the way over to C. Okay, I see that C is on that point for 2 and 75 hundredths. Okay, I'm going to go all the way up and then go over. And then I see that the y coordinate for that is going to be 3. 2 and 75 hundredths, and then 3. Okay, all right, and so I know I already labeled D. I go over 2 and 25 hundredths, okay, and then I'm going to go up, and it's going to be 50 hundredths. I'm going to do the same thing for this point E that I have labeled here. I'm going to go all the way over to 1 and 25 hundredths. And then I can see that E is on that 2 wholes. Okay, I have that labeled right there. I'm going to remember to be labeling my points 2 and 25 hundredths and 50 hundredths. 1 and 25 hundredths and 2 wholes. Okay, and then my final one for F, I'm going to go over. I have 75 hundredths, and then I'm going to go all the way up to 2 and 75 hundredths. And then I'm going to label those points. So 75 hundredths and 2 and 75 hundredths. So what I've done now is I've labeled all these points, and so now the next thing that we're going to be doing, we're going to kind of extend our knowledge of using coordinate points to start creating line segments. So the first line segment I'm going to create is going to be, and I'm going to just write it right down here, it's going to be line A, B, C. Okay, so what that means is I'm going to draw a line through points A, B, and C. Okay, I'm going to use my handy dandy straight edge. We're just going to go down and stop right there. And that apparently didn't put anything down. I might need to sharpen my pencil. So A, B, and C. Okay, All right, and I've connected those. So I know that my line segment from before is any space, a line that has any definite starting point, which would be A, and a definite ending point, which would be C. Okay? All right. And then now what I'm going to do, okay, is I'm going to do the same for line D, E, and F. And one thing I forgot to do for A, B, and C for our purposes today, so we can see what a region is I'm actually going to extend this line all the way to the bottom of our coordinate plane and all the way to the top. Okay, so I have a line that's going through A, B, and C. Okay, and then now I'm going to do the same. I have line D, E, and F. I'm going to continue that line so it goes all the way to the end of the coordinate plane so we can start talking about regions in our coordinate plane. I'm going to take that all the way up there to the top. Okay, so as you can see, I have lines A, B, and C, okay, in line D, E, and F, okay? All right, we're going to make sure that's right on those points. I'm going to just make them a little bit bigger so it matches up. Good, awesome. Okay, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to shade in a region, okay? So the region I'm going to shade in is going to be the intersecting points of lines A, B, and C, and D, E, and F, and I'm going to shade in the region that is less than the y coordinate of 1 75/100. And so I'm going to shade this in my nice handy dandy mustard colored marker. Okay, and so that would be an example of shading in one region. Okay, and so I'll write that over here. So our first region, so I'll say region 1, okay, all right, our y, okay, region 1, our y is going to be less than 1 75/100. Okay, I'll shade in one more region here too. Okay, so now we're going to do one for the x. So our region 2, and we can remember that regions are specific areas that are created on our coordinate planes, okay, and oftentimes these are created by intersecting lines. Okay, our region 2, we are going to have the region of our coordinate plane that is encompassed by our intersecting lines A, B, C, and D, E, F. Okay, so region 2, we are going to have everything that is less than 1 50/100 on our x. Okay, so x is less than 1 50/100. So what that means is I'm going to go over to where I see 1 50/100 on my x, and I'm going to go up, okay? And then I'm going to shade in every single part of this region that was created by that intersecting line that is less than 1 50/100. Okay? So that's going to be our second region. I'm going to use my handy dandy teal marker now to shade these in. Okay, keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay, all right, and so that is going to be our region 2. Okay, so just to show, it's going to be region 1, and then that right there is going to be region 2. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video right now. Remember, the big ideas for today are us going to be thinking about the distance between whole numbers, the amount of sections that we have between those whole numbers, and then using that number of sections to determine what each one of these lines on our x-axis, what each one of these lines on our y-axis, what each one of those lines represents in a decimal amount. So like we had here, we had 4 spaces between 0 and 1. I know that 1 divided by 4 is 25 hundredths, so each one of those lines is going to increase by 25 hundredths. So we're going to keep going with part 2 for our problem set.